At 9:27 in the morning on December 13, 1943, Second Lieutenant Philip Adair pulled his Curtiss P-40 N Warhawk into a climbing turn over Assam, India, as 64 Japanese aircraft appeared through the morning haze 3 miles to the east, heading straight for his base at Dinjan Airfield. The 23-year-old Adair had flown 43 combat missions, with the 89th Fighter Squadron protecting the Hump airlift, but this morning he was the only pilot in the air when the formation arrived. In the previous 8 weeks, Japanese raids on Allied airfields throughout northeast India had destroyed 47 transport aircraft on the ground and had killed 112 personnel. His P-40, nicknamed Lulu Belle and carrying the number 44, mounted 650 caliber Browning machine guns with enough ammunition for about 12 seconds of continuous fire. The enemy formation included 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers, escorted by about 40 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters, flying in layers above and below the bomber stream. Intelligence reports stated that similar-sized raids in Burma had achieved 90% hit rates on airfields without defenses. Below him, Dinjan Airfield contained 14 C-47 transport aircraft loaded with vital supplies for Chiang Kai-shek's forces in China, a field hospital treating 63 wounded soldiers, and fuel reserves sufficient to support Hump flights for 11 days. If the bombers reached the field without resistance, the damage would cripple Allied supply operations over the Himalayas for weeks. The nearest friendly fighters were 38 minutes away at their base in Jorhat. Adair checked his fuel gauge. Full internal tanks, 180 gallons, which meant approximately 90 minutes of flight time at combat power. The Japanese formation was 3,000 feet below him, traveling at 240 miles per hour toward the airfield. Standard doctrine instructed fighter pilots to wait for reinforcements when outnumbered by more than 5 to 1. Adair faced 64-1 odds. He could radio for help and trail the formation until support arrived. By then the bombs would already be falling, or he could choose to attack alone and attempt to break up their bombing run. Adair pushed the throttle forward. His Allison V1710 engine answered immediately, the manifold pressure rising to 54 inches. The P-40 sped up to 320 miles per hour. He placed himself 4,000 feet above the bomber formation, approaching from the south with the sun at his back. The Oscar fighters had not seen him yet. Their attention remained fixed ahead on the target. He possessed one advantage: surprise. The Japanese pilots expected fighters to intercept them close to the airfield, not 20 miles out. Adair calculated his attack angle. Strike the lead bomber group first. Ignore the fighters at the beginning. Break their bombing precision. Force them to scatter. Push them to abandon the run. Can one P-40 disrupt 64 Japanese aircraft? Please like this video to see what happens next. Subscribe for more stories and let us return to Adair. The lead Sally bomber group flew in a tight pattern, 6 aircraft arranged in 2 V shapes of 3. Adair rolled the plane upside down, pulled the nose down, and dived toward the bombers from their 7 o'clock high position. His airspeed increased quickly. 360 miles per hour, 360. The P-40's Allison engine screamed at full power. Range closed fast. The bomber crews still had not seen him. At 800 yards he opened fire. His 650 caliber guns thundered, the tracers arching toward the lead bomber. Rounds climbed along the Sally's left wing. Fabric ripped and metal sparked. The bomber's port engine burst into bright orange flame. Thick black smoke poured from the cowling. The formation collapsed. Bombers scattered left and right, their tight V-shape dissolving into confusion. Adair pulled up sharply, 7 times the force of gravity pressing him into his seat, then rolled right. 40 Oscar fighters were diving toward him. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar was one of the most agile fighters in the entire Pacific theater. Powered by a Nakajima H, a 115 engine that produced 1,150 horsepower, it could reach 329 miles per hour at 13,000 feet, and could perform turning circles tighter than any American fighter. The Oscar's butterfly combat flaps let it shed speed quickly in tight turns without stalling. Japanese pilots used this strength without mercy. In the previous 6 months, Oscars had shot down 63 Allied fighters over Burma and northeast India. Adair's P-40N was faster in level flight, but it could not match the turning ability of the Oscars. The Warhawk's Allison V1710-81 engine produced 1,240 horsepower at 3,000 revolutions per minute, giving the aircraft a top speed of 378 miles per hour below 12,000 feet. But in a long turning fight, the heavier American fighter would lose energy faster than the lighter Japanese aircraft. Standard P-40 tactics against Oscars were clear. Never turn with them. Use speed, strike and then break away. Extend the distance, set up the next pass. Adair could not extend the distance. If he pulled away, the bombers would regroup and finish their attack run on Dinjan. He had to keep pressure on the formation, keep them scattered, keep them uneasy, even if it meant facing 40 Oscars alone. The first 4 Oscars approached in a loose finger 4 pattern from his 10 o'clock high position. Adair rolled left, raised the nose, and fired a 2-second burst at the lead fighter. The 50 caliber rounds passed high. The Oscar broke right and its wingman followed. Adair reversed direction and dived to preserve speed. 2 more Oscars dropped down from above. He spotted them at 400 yards, pulled into a climbing left turn and fired again, but still no hits. His ammunition counter showed 800 rounds left across all 6 guns. That meant about 6 more attacks at his current rate of fire. Behind the fighters, the Sally bombers were trying to regroup. 3 groups of 6 aircraft were pulling back into formation. If they rebuilt their bombing V-shape, they would continue the attack. Adair had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached their release point over Dinjan. He leveled out, pushed the throttle fully forward, and dove toward the bombers once more. 8 Oscars followed him down. The P-40 reached 405 miles per hour in the dive. The Oscars could not keep up at that speed. Adair widened the distance, leveled off at bomber altitude, and aimed at the right side Sally formation. Range 300 yards, he fired. The tracers converged on the lead bomber's right engine. The Mitsubishi HA-101 radial engine detonated in a burst of fire. The bomber rolled right, trailing flames and debris. Its wingman broke formation to avoid slamming into it. Adair pushed the rudder, slid left, and fired at another Sally. His rounds tore through the bomber's thin fuselage skin. The Ki-21 had no armor to protect the crew and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Designed in 1936, it was outdated by 1943 standards, but it could still carry 2,250 pounds of bombs, enough to destroy everything on Dinjan Airfield. The Oscar fighters were closing in again, 12 of them this time. Adair's fuel gauge showed 162 gallons remaining. His ammunition counter showed 650 rounds left. The bombers were 19 miles from Dinjan. He had perhaps 4 minutes before they entered their drop zone. Then his engine began overheating. The Allison V-17-1081 was a liquid-cooled engine. Coolant moved through passages in the cylinder heads and engine block, absorbing heat from combustion, then flowed through a radiator mounted beneath the fuselage. At combat power settings above 50 inches of manifold pressure, the engine produced extremely high temperatures. The coolant system was built to sustain that power level for about 20 minutes. Adair had been at full power for 11 minutes. His coolant temperature gauge read 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal temperature was 210. At 250, the engine would begin to break down. He had 3 options: reduce power to cool the engine, abandon the attack and return to base, or keep fighting and risk engine failure over enemy territory. The Sally bombers were 17 miles from Dinjan, still close enough to hit the airfield, still dangerous. Adair kept the throttle fully forward. 2 Oscars approached him head-on. Their combined closing speed was over 600 miles per hour. Both fighters opened fire at 500 yards. Adair saw their muzzle flashes, 7.7mm tracers marching toward his nose. He fired back. His heavier 50 caliber rounds carried more force and traveled farther. At 350 yards, his rounds struck the left Oscar's engine cowling. The light fighter shook, veered left, and trailed white coolant vapor. Its wingman followed. Adair rolled right and dove. His coolant temperature reached 240 degrees. The Sally bombers were 15 miles from the target. 2 formations of 6 aircraft had reformed into bombing V-shapes. The third formation was scattered, with 3 bombers struggling to rejoin. Adair aimed for the lead formation again. 6 Oscars tried to cut him off. He dove past them at 390 miles per hour, far too fast for them to follow. At bomber altitude, he leveled out and fired at the lead Sally. His first burst struck the bomber's right wing root. The wing structure failed. The outer panel folded upward and tore away. The Sally rolled upside down and fell into a spin. There were no parachutes. The crew stayed with the aircraft. The formation broke apart again. Bombers scattered in 3 directions. Their bombing accuracy was ruined. Even if they dropped now, their bombs would scatter across miles of jungle instead of striking the airfield. Adair pulled up sharply. His coolant gauge showed 248 degrees. The engine was running roughly. He could feel vibrations through the control stick. Detonation was beginning inside the cylinders. Pre-ignition was setting in from the extreme heat. If he did not reduce power soon, the engine would lock up. 8 Oscars dived on him from above. He saw them too late. He rolled left, too slow. 7.7mm rounds ripped through his right wing. Fabric shredded, metal twisted. One round struck his right aileron control rod. The aileron response turned soft and sluggish. He had to use much more right stick pressure to keep the aircraft level. Another burst marched up his fuselage. Rounds sparked against his engine cowling. One pierced the coolant reservoir behind the firewall. Green coolant splashed across his windscreen. The engine temperature gauge climbed past 260 degrees. Steam burst from the seams of the cowling. His oil pressure dropped. The Allison was dying. Adair pulled the throttle back. The engine revolutions dropped from 3,000 to 2,400. It was not enough power to hold altitude. The P-40 began sinking, 1,000 feet per minute, then 1,500. The Oscars were circling above him, watching and waiting. Then his engine caught fire. Fire in a liquid-cooled aircraft engine follows a predictable pattern. First, the burning coolant turns to vapor and ignites. The flames spread forward along the engine cowling, pulled by the flow of air. If the fire reaches the fuel lines on the left side of the engine, the aircraft explodes. Adair had perhaps 30 seconds before that happened. Standard procedure for an engine fire was to shut down immediately and bail out, but his altitude was only 8,000 feet, dropping fast, and he was 12 miles from friendly territory over jungle where Japanese patrols operated. He kept the engine running. The Allison's fuel mixture could be adjusted manually. Adair pulled the mixture control back to idle, cut off for 3 seconds, starving the engine of fuel. The fire weakened. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine sputtered, caught, and continued running, though roughly. Power output had dropped to about 60%, not enough to climb and barely enough to hold level flight. He had to choose between flying home on a burning and damaged engine or abandoning the aircraft over hostile ground. The Sally bombers were 13 miles from Dinjan, still close enough to turn back, but their formations had collapsed. Individual bombers were heading southeast toward Burma. The raid was finished. The airfield was safe. Adair turned southwest toward his base at Nagaghuli, 43 miles away. About 15 minutes of flying time if the engine survived. 6 Oscars followed behind him. At 7,000 feet, his engine oil pressure fell to 0. The Allison needed oil pressure to lubricate the connecting rods, the crankshaft, and the camshaft. Without pressure, metal rubbed directly against metal. Friction created heat. Heat caused expansion. Parts seized. Adair felt the engine vibration grow stronger. The propeller started windmilling unevenly. Power dropped even more. His airspeed fell to 180 miles per hour. The P-40 stalled at 120. He was losing the small margin between controlled flight and falling. Behind him, the Oscars closed to 400 yards. They did not fire. They were watching, waiting for the engine to die, waiting for him to bail out or crash. One Oscar pulled alongside, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face. The Japanese pilot motioned downward. Land the plane, surrender, become a prisoner. Adair ignored him. At 6,000 feet, smoke began filling the cockpit. It was not from the engine fire, but from electrical wiring behind the instrument panel. The rounds that hit his fuselage had severed control cables and damaged the electrical system. The smoke burned his eyes and throat. He slid the canopy open. The blast of wind cleared some of the smoke, but the slipstream made breathing hard. His airspeed dropped to 160 miles per hour. The Oscars pulled back. They were not going to waste ammunition. The American pilot was as good as dead. His aircraft was crippled. The engine was failing. He would crash in the jungle. They climbed to circle above him, watching him descend. At 4,000 feet, Adair's right aileron control cable snapped. The aileron swung to full deflection. The P-40 rolled hard to the right and the nose dropped into a dive. He pulled back on the control stick with both hands. Nothing happened. The elevator cables were damaged. He had no pitch control. The nose stayed down. His airspeed increased. 200 miles per hour, 220, 250. The jungle rushed upward at him. Altitude 3,000 feet, 2,500, 2,000. He was going to crash. Then he had an idea. The P-40's damaged aileron was forcing the right wing downward. The broken elevator cables left the horizontal stabilizer stuck in a nose-down position. Gravity and aerodynamic forces were dragging the aircraft into an uncontrolled dive. But aerodynamics work in both directions. If Adair rolled the aircraft upside down, the damaged aileron would push the right wing upward instead of downward. The elevator jammed in a nose-down trim would push the tail downward, raising the nose. Flying inverted would reverse the control effects. The damage that was killing him right side up might save him while upside down. At 1,800 feet above the jungle, Adair rolled the P-40 completely inverted. -1 times the force of gravity pressed him against his shoulder straps. Blood rushed to his head. His vision turned red around the edges. The fuel system, designed for positive G-loads, struggled to feed fuel to the engine while inverted. The Allison engine coughed, sputtered, nearly died, then caught again, running rough but still producing power. The nose came up. The descent slowed. At 1,200 feet, the P-40 leveled out while flying upside down at 140 miles per hour. Adair held the inverted position for 40 seconds. His airspeed increased to 160. He was climbing slowly, 50 feet per minute, but he was climbing. Then the fuel starvation problem returned. The engine began cutting out. He rolled right side up. The damaged controls immediately shoved the nose down. The P-40 began descending again, 600 feet per minute. Adair waited until he had lost 300 feet, then rolled inverted again. The nose rose. He climbed 200 feet before fuel starvation forced him upright. The cycle repeated, upside down to climb, right side up to let fuel flow properly. Flip, climb, flip, descend, flip, climb. The 6 Oscars circling above watched this unbelievable sight. An American P-40 with a burning engine and ruined controls, flying alternately inverted and upright, refusing to crash, clawing for altitude with the raw determination of a wounded animal refusing to die. 1 Oscar dove to inspect him. Adair spotted the fighter, rolled inverted to gain altitude, then rolled upright directly at the Japanese pilot. The Oscar broke away. The American pilot was either insane or desperate. Either way, the Oscars chose not to attack. They turned east toward Burma. Adair continued his rolling climb toward Nagaghuli. His fuel gauge showed 83 gallons. His oil pressure gauge showed 0. The needle had been stuck at 0 for 9 minutes. The engine should have locked up by now. The connecting rods should have fused to the crankshaft. The fact that it kept running defied mechanical logic. The Allison was running on momentum, friction, and whatever microscopic oil film remained on its internal parts. His altitude climbed to 3,000 feet, then 4,000. The base at Nagaghuli was 21 miles southwest, about 11 minutes away if he could hold his current speed. His coolant temperature gauge no longer showed anything. The needle had melted off at some point. Smoke still poured from the cowling, but the flames had faded. Either the fire had burned through all remaining fuel, or the lack of coolant had somehow choked it out. At 5,000 feet, Adair spotted Nagaghuli Airfield ahead, the runway, the tower, the revetment's safety. But he now faced a new problem. His landing gear was hydraulic. The hydraulic system depended on engine power. His engine was producing only a little power and could stop entirely at any moment. If he lowered the gear and the engine quit, he would crash short of the runway with the gear down. If he kept the gear up and attempted a belly landing, the impact might rupture his remaining fuel tanks and the aircraft would burn. He needed the gear down and locked before the engine failed. He reached for the gear lever. His right hand was trembling, not from fear, but from carbon monoxide poisoning. The cockpit smoke had been collecting for 14 minutes. He pulled the gear lever down. Nothing happened. The P-40's hydraulic system operated at 1,000 pounds per square inch. Hydraulic fluid, pressurized by an engine-driven pump, flowed through steel lines to the actuators that extended and retracted the landing gear. With the engine barely running, the hydraulic pump was not producing enough pressure. The gear stayed locked in the up position. The P-40 had a backup system, a manual hand pump mounted on the left side of the cockpit. 28 strokes of the pump handle would manually build enough hydraulic pressure to lower the landing gear. Adair grabbed the pump handle with his left hand, keeping his right hand on the control stick. He pumped. 1, 2, 3, nothing. The gear stayed up. The hand pump needed both hands to work properly, but letting go of the stick meant losing control of the aircraft. His damaged ailerons and elevator would instantly force the nose down. He reached behind his seat and loosened his lap belt. He wrapped the belt around the control stick, looped it through the seat frame, and pulled it tight. The improvised setup held the stick in a roughly neutral position, not perfect control but enough to keep the aircraft flying straight. He grabbed the hand pump with both hands and pumped hard, 5 strokes, 10, 15. At stroke 23 he felt resistance, the hydraulic pressure was building. At stroke 28 he heard a thump from beneath the cockpit. The left main gear extended and locked. The right main gear followed 3 seconds later. The P-40 immediately became draggy. Lowering the gear increased drag significantly. His airspeed fell from 160 miles per hour to 135, still above stall speed but not by much. The engine was producing maybe 40% power now, barely enough to hold altitude with the gear down. Nagaghuli's runway was 7 miles ahead, 3 minutes. His vision tunneled. Gray edges closed in around his sight. Carbon monoxide poisoning was affecting his brain. He shook his head and focused on the runway. 6 miles. His engine temperature gauge, the only one still working, showed 310 degrees, far beyond safe limits. Metal parts inside the engine were swelling from heat. Clearances were shrinking. At any moment a piston could seize, or a valve could stick, or a connecting rod could break. 5 miles. The tower crew at Nagaghuli saw him coming, a P-40 trailing smoke from the cowling, flying unevenly, gear down. They assumed he would attempt a normal landing. Lower the flaps, slow down, touch down on the main wheels first. Standard landing procedure. But Adair's flaps were hydraulic as well. With almost no engine power, he could not generate enough hydraulic pressure for both the gear and the flaps. The gear was down, the flaps stayed up. Landing without flaps required a higher landing speed, about 120 miles per hour instead of 90. That meant a longer landing roll. Nagaghuli's runway was 4,000 feet long. A landing without flaps in a damaged aircraft needed at least 3,000 feet. It was possible if he held his airspeed, if the engine kept running, if he touched down smoothly. At 2 miles from the runway, his engine quit. The propeller spun freely and then stopped. No power, no thrust. The P-40 became a glider, a very poor glider. The Warhawk's glide ratio was roughly 8-1. From 2,000 feet of altitude, he could glide about 3 miles. The runway was 2 miles away. Theoretically, it was possible, but his damaged aircraft carried extra drag from the fight. Bullet holes in the wings and fuselage broke up the airflow. His true glide ratio was worse than normal, perhaps 6-1. He was not going to reach the runway. He was going to crash short in the jungle. After surviving 64 Japanese aircraft, after flying inverted for 11 minutes, after nursing a failing engine for 15 minutes, he would crash 200 yards from safety because the engine failed at the worst possible time. Then he remembered something from training, something his instructor had once mentioned about P-40 glide performance, something about flying inverted. In a normal glide, an aircraft descends nose first, pulled downward by gravity while the wings generate lift. But when inverted, the aerodynamics reverse. The wing shape that produces upward lift when right side up produces downward force when upside down. However, at certain angles of attack, this reversal actually reduces drag more than flying right side up. An inverted glide could, in theory, extend the aircraft's range by lowering drag. The idea had been covered briefly in training. No instructor expected any pilot to actually try it. Adair had nothing to lose. He rolled the aircraft inverted at 1,800 feet, 1 mile from the runway. Blood surged into his head, his vision tinged with red. He held the inverted attitude, watching the jungle pass beneath him or above him. His sense of direction became distorted. The airspeed held steady at 125 miles per hour. The rate of descent was 500 feet per minute, better than the 700 feet per minute he had been losing while upright. The tower operators at Nagaghuli saw an inverted P-40 coming in with the landing gear extended. Gear down while inverted was aerodynamically incorrect and structurally risky. The gear doors were designed for air loads from below and were now being hit from above, but the gear stayed in place. The P-40 continued its inverted approach. On the ground, a crew chief named Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez watched through binoculars. He saw the inverted aircraft, saw the landing gear extended, saw the smoke trailing from the engine. His first thought was that a Japanese pilot had stolen a P-40 and was trying to strafe the field. Martinez sprinted toward the nearest 50 caliber machine gun position. 3 other ground crew members ran with him. They reached the gun emplacement and began swinging the weapon toward the approaching plane. Adair was at 400 feet of altitude, half a mile from the runway threshold, still inverted. His vision was fading. Gray tunnels closed in. Carbon monoxide and negative G-forces were shutting down his brain. He had perhaps 20 seconds of consciousness left. He needed to roll upright, line up with the runway, and land. But if he rolled upright too early, the damaged controls would push the nose down and he would crash short of the runway. If he rolled too late, he would overshoot the field entirely. At 200 feet of altitude and 300 yards from the threshold, Adair rolled the aircraft upright. The damaged aileron instantly forced the right wing downward. He countered with left stick pressure, wrestling the airplane and forcing the wings level. The nose wanted to fall. He pulled back on the stick. The broken elevator cables gave him partial authority, not much, just enough. The P-40 descended toward the runway at a sharp angle, nose high, wings shaking. Martinez and his gun crew followed the aircraft with their weapon. The P-40 was clearly damaged. Smoke poured from it. It might be friendly. It might be enemy. In 3 seconds, the aircraft would cross the runway threshold. Martinez had to decide, fire or hold fire. He held fire. Adair crossed the threshold at 90 feet, dropping fast, too steep. The P-40 fell the last 90 feet in 4 seconds. The main wheels slammed onto the concrete runway with a 7 times gravity impact. The landing gear struts compressed completely. The tail wheel struck hard, metal screamed. The right landing gear collapsed. The right wing dropped. The wingtip hit the runway and dug in. The aircraft spun into a ground loop to the right, turning 180 degrees, spraying sparks and fragments of concrete. It slid backward for 200 feet and came to a stop. Smoke rolled from the engine compartment. Fire crews sprinted toward the aircraft. Adair sat still in the cockpit for 12 seconds. Then he unlatched his shoulder straps, pushed himself up, and climbed out onto the wing. His legs gave way. He steadied himself on the wing root. Ground crew members reached him and helped him down. Martinez arrived with the fire crew. They opened the engine cowling. The Allison engine was ruined, pistons seized, crankshaft warped, oil pan split open, coolant spilled everywhere. Adair walked around the aircraft with Martinez. They counted the damage. 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 7 in the right wing, 4 in the left wing. One round had cut the right aileron control cable completely. Another had pierced the hydraulic reservoir. A third had sliced through 2 electrical bundles behind the instrument panel. The engine had suffered catastrophic damage from heat and lack of oil. Every cylinder was scored. 3 connecting rods had welded themselves to the crankshaft. The coolant system was completely destroyed. Lulu Belle would never fly again, but Philip Adair had saved Dinjan Airfield. Intelligence reports confirmed that all 24 Sally bombers had turned back without releasing their bombs. The Japanese formation had scattered 15 miles short of the target. 40 Oscar fighters had escorted empty bombers back to Burma. 0 bombs struck Allied facilities. 0 personnel on the ground were harmed. 14 C-47 transports remained intact and operational. The hump airlift continued without any disruption. On December 16, 1943, 3 days after the battle, 10th Air Force Headquarters interviewed Adair about the fight. He described the sequence of attacks, the inverted flight method, and the landing attempt. Flight surgeons examined him. Carbon monoxide levels in his blood were still high 72 hours after the mission. They concluded he had flown the final 11 minutes with severe poisoning. That level of impairment should have left him unconscious. He had somehow stayed conscious and functioning through sheer determination alone. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell, commander of United States forces in the China-Burma-India theater, presented 2nd Lieutenant Philip Adair with the Silver Star. The citation stated, "For gallantry in action against enemy forces on December 13, 1943, when Lieutenant Adair, flying alone, engaged and disrupted a formation of 64 enemy aircraft attacking Allied installations, continuing his attack despite severe aircraft damage and personal injury, thereby preventing destruction of vital supply facilities." Adair flew 95 additional combat missions with the 80th Fighter Group. He reached ace status with 5 confirmed victories. On his last mission in July 1944, he shot down 2 Ki-43 Oscars over northern Burma. He returned to the United States in September 1944, survived the war, and remained in the Air Force for 30 years. He retired as a full colonel in 1971. The 80th Fighter Group, known as the Burma Banshees, continued operations until August 1945. The unit destroyed 413 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and 147 on the ground. They lost 63 pilots who were killed or missing. Their death's head skull insignia became one of the most recognized symbols in the China-Burma-India theater. The P-40 Warhawk never achieved the fame of the P-51 Mustang or the P-47 Thunderbolt. It was slower than both aircraft. It could not fight effectively above 15,000 feet. By 1943, it was viewed as outdated, but in the hands of determined pilots like Philip Adair, the sturdy Curtiss fighter proved that what mattered most in battle was not the aircraft specifications. It was the courage and skill of the pilot flying it. 1 pilot, 1 outdated fighter, 64 enemy aircraft. On December 13, 1943, Philip Adair proved that impossible odds mean nothing when someone refuses to give up. His solution to damaged controls, flying alternately inverted and upright for 11 minutes, broke every standard flying rule. His inverted landing approach with the gear extended had never been attempted before and was never duplicated afterward. That is the story of the Burma Banshees and the day 1 P-40 pilot disrupted an entire Japanese raid. For more stories like these, make sure to subscribe.